You're listening to Pod for Israel. For more information, go to oneforisrael.org. I want to welcome you to another exciting episode of Pod for Israel. We have again with us Dr. Golan Broshi, and we're continuing to dive into the heart of the law. And this week, we're going to be discussing the intrinsic motivation. Why do we follow God's commands or not? What is the whole perspective here? What is the point of it all? Why did God even make the law? And what does Yeshua really speak into the law in his teachings? So take it away, Golan.
Yes, so in the education field, and I'm talking about secular education, educators are trying to see what's the best motivation to make a kid learn something and keep learning it. So they found two kinds of motivation. One is called intrinsic motivation, intrinsic, inner, right. And the other one is extrinsic. So I have here a quote by an Israeli secular professor from education, of the field of education. His name is Yoram Harpaz, and he tries to explain the difference between the two motivations. And he says that if you're operating under extrinsic motivation, you're doing it out of the will to get something in result. So you're only doing something, you're only operating with expectation to get something for you. Yes, so I'm doing it for a reason that would benefit myself. This is extrinsic motivation. Now he says, in contrast, intrinsic motivation is when you do something because it's value, because right. The thing itself has a value. You don't accept to get something necessarily for you. You're doing it because it's the right thing.
So and that's, really option A is like when you're like, for your kid, hey, if you don't clean up your room, you're going to get punishment. Or
you're not going to get something.
Or if you clean up your room, I'm going to give you extra allowance. Yeah. On the other side, then the proper intrinsic motivation is when you say, I want to clean up the room because it's the right thing. I want to have a neat space.
Exactly.
I want to be able to find my stuff and so forth and so on. So that's kind of intrinsic versus extrinsic.
Exactly. So educators found that the best learning is intrinsic learning, for intrinsic right. motivation. So the kid would learn it because the learning has a value of itself. You don't learn it to get a grade, so you can get in a better school, or you learn it because the learning itself has a value. What you learn has a value important enough for you to know inside. So you don't have any extrinsic motivation to learn it, but intrinsic.
And with like extrinsic motivation, once the reward or punishment is gone, then you have no more motivation. You're not driven there anymore.
Exactly. So for example, if people are studying for an exam just to get a pass, what would happen to the knowledge after they did the exam?
They throw it away.
Exactly. They don't need it because it was extrinsic motivation all from the start. But but what if you learn something because you want to know it? No, right. Forget school. You just want to know it. No grades, nothing.
Then you're a student for life.
Exactly. So this is now in rabbinic Judaism, we have something fascinating. We have the yeshiva. Now, what happens in the yeshiva? There's thousands of kids, sometimes adults, that are studying day in, day out, day and night, studying with what appears to be no extrinsic motivation, no grades, no nothing, no exams. They just study Torah, quote unquote, because they study the Talmud, but in their mind they're studying Torah, although of course they study the Talmud, but they study it from what it appears to be a intrinsic motivation, because you see they study in what we say chavruta. Yeah. Chavruta is when two students are studying together. They don't even need a teacher. They study it from what is appeared to be love for the Torah, for the Talmud. Now, they even call it in the Talmud Torah lishma. So they study the Torah for its own sake. They study it for its own sake because there's a value in the study by itself. You don't need any other motivation. You don't need to get anything from it. You just need to study. Now, of course, scholars have noticed it's a Greek idea. There's a professor named Miriam Schmida, and she said it's study something for just to study is a Greek philosophy idea that the rabbis took. But the question is, are they really studying in the yeshiva just for the sake of the study, out of intrinsic motivation, or is it not so? And the answer is that some scholars that dig deep into the yeshiva study, the yeshiva structure, they found out that although it appears that they study from intrinsic motivation, those yeshiva students, in reality, they don't. There are extrinsic motivation, even inside the rabbinic cult, in the yeshiva, for studying the Torah all day long with no something that appears to be like extrinsic motivation. But the scholars, scholars, Israeli professors that dug in deep in the yeshiva structure, they found out there are in extrinsic motivation. And now I want to quote from Professor Eli Berman, and he might be an Orthodox professor. Yeah, I don't know if he's secular or Orthodox, but he found that by studying, first of all, by studying in the yeshiva, the cult, the rabbinic sect, it protects itself. Not only protects itself from the outside world, it grows even more. It grows. Its population grows.
They invest into it.
Exactly. The other thing is, the more you study in the yeshiva, the more subsidized you get from the government.
Right. If you come to the yeshiva, twice a week, you're not going to get much.
Exactly. Because then the thing is, well, what? So you're working half a week and you're studying half a week? Okay.
But beyond that, the rabbi has to like you. He has to see that you're committed, and then you can rise up in the ranks.
And that's exactly it. And the most important extrinsic motivation that the scholars found is that because studying is a value, study is in the rabbinic sect, the more you study, the more your value of a man grows up. So you're going to get the better shidduch, the better fix in the wedding, the better shidduch. You're going to get the better position in the community.
Right.
So the more you invest in studying, your status goes up. So after all, the studying in the yeshiva is not intrinsic after all. You understand? It's not intrinsic. It's extrinsic, but you don't see it above the surface. You have to dig deep.
Which even like in the Orthodox culture, every Jewish mother would love for her son to be a Rav. You know what I mean? If he could be a rabbi, that's
exactly because it's like a doctor
like
or a lawyer
or something big.
So now we're going to see in the Word of God. So we established that in the rabbinic realm, even the yeshiva students are not studying out of pure intrinsic motivation.
Well, and I'll even just, even if you take it at face value and said, okay, they're studying for the Torah's sake, is that the proper intrinsic motivation that we see God pointing to? Or is that something that they invented themselves? Again, you said that's a Greek perspective. God's perspective, as I see intrinsic motivation, is that it's transformative. If it doesn't change us, then it's for nothing. If you go to do all the feasts and give all the tithes and all the offerings and everything, but it doesn't change who you are and how you give and how you're generous and how you're kind and how you show mercy, then it's for nothing.
And it's good that you raised up this point, because in the Torah, every time the verb to study the Word of God, to study Torah comes, the verb to do comes in the same verse.
Exactly.
So in the Torah, you always study in order to do, to operate, to make it come to pass. So you never study just in order to study. Like
Yeshua said, ever learning but never coming to the truth.
Exactly. So even in the Torah, this idea of studying for the sake of study is completely wrong. There's no in the Torah you always study to do. So for example, if I teach you to love your neighbor, would it be only for the sake of teaching? Right. Or do I want you to make it happen?
And again, we can look at, the the most ancient historical documents that we can see, and we see that even when Paul visited the men in Athens, they do nothing but hear something new every day. Yeah. They don't do anything
ideas,
with it. They just hear these ideas, and that's just so shocking that Rabbinic Judaism has actually become more Greek than anything.
Exactly. And converted those Greek ideas into the yeshiva, converted it, yeah?
Wow.
Now, let's check, we'll check 3 examples from the Old Testament, from the Hebrew Bible, yeah, from the Tanakh, to see what was the motivation of 3 figures to worship God, to work, to obey God, to love God. And we'll start with Abram. And, in Genesis 22, verse 1 and 2, God is appearing to Abram and he's telling him, Abram, I want you to take your son. Now, according to the Midrash, Abram is asking which one. So God is saying the one you love. So Abram is saying, I love both of them. I love Ishmael and Isaac. So God is saying, you're only one. So Abram is saying, wait, but Isaac is the only one from Sarah, and Ishmael is the only one from Hagar. And then God says, Isaac. Yeah, in the verse it says, take your son, your only son, your beloved son, Isaac. Yeah, and I want you to sacrifice him, or how do you say, put him into
sacrifice.
Yep, on the Mount of Moriah. Right. And it says that God did it in first 1. It's verse 1. It's Genesis 22:1. God did it in order to try Abram. Now the question is, try what? It doesn't say. It just say Nisa, to try him, to try. But it doesn't say what. Only later it gives us the answer to why did God try Abram? Try what? Why did He give him this commandment to slaughter Isaac? And the thing is that Abram did it. He did it. Now here's the question.
Now he went all the way to the point, and God said, "Stop."
When did Abram? But he was willing to do it.
Yes.
But the question is, when did he get Isaac? Did he have 20 other kids before, and Isaac was just another one, or did he have to wait most of his life?
Yeah.
He got Isaac. That was the promised son.
Yeah. It was the supernatural son.
Now to sacrifice him, there's nothing that Abram can benefit from doing it, right? Nothing. No benefit whatsoever. Yeah. Besides loving God and obeying Him. Because otherwise, what benefit can Abram get by following God's command in this case?
In that case, he actually loses the very thing that was promised to him.
After 100 years waiting for the son, he's going to lose it. And the shocking thing is that he wakes up early in the morning and does it. He wants to do it. He's doing it as if he knows that God doesn't owe him anything. God gave him Isaac.
Even if you rewind a little bit further, when God commanded circumcision, that was before he even had the chance to have him. Yeah. And you got to think of, I'm messing around with something that's going to help me make a kid, and did I screw this up? Did I mess this up? I mean,
And in verse 12, on the same chapter 22, in verse 12, God stops him, right? Before he slaughters Isaac, God stops him and says, now I know that you fear me. So now we know why he tested him.
Right.
Why did he try him? He tested him to see if he fears him for nothing, out of just pure love.
Right.
And Abram passed the test. He did it for nothing. He didn't think... Now in Hebrews it says that Abram believed that God can raise the dead.
Right.
But I suspect that even if Abram didn't believe that, he would do it, because he knew that God gave him, God could take it. It's God's business.
It's incredible faith.
Yeah.
He didn't even have. That's the amazing thing when looking back at our patriarchs is he didn't have a scripture to reference to. He didn't have an Abraham before him that he could look back and say God was faithful there, He'll be faithful now. It was,
amazing.
It's amazing.
Yes. Now, so that's Abram acting out of pure intrinsic motivation to serve God with nothing to no expectation. You owe me. I deserve this. Nothing.
Right.
You say, I do, because everything comes from you. Now, the second example we'll give is from Job. And Job, it says just from the beginning that God blessed him. He was blessed than anyone else. He was the richest guy around. So blessed with cattle, with money, with sons and daughters, everything. He was the richest.
Right.
And then, again, it seems like God had a bet with Satan and tried Job. And the key verse appears in Job 7 and 8. In Job chapter 1, verse 7, God says to Satan, "Did you notice my servant Job? How righteous he is, how God-fearing he is?" And then Satan tells God something. And that's the anchor, the leverage of all the book. Because Satan asks God, does he worship you for nothing? Hachinam. In Hebrew it says hachinam, for free. Does he work? Does Job do it for free? Hachinam yerei Yov Elohim. Does he worship you? Does he fear you for nothing? Or God, if you take everything from Job, he's going to curse you. He's not going to worship you anymore. He's not going to put faith in you because you took everything. And that's the leverage. That's the anchor of the whole book.
Mm-hmm.
That's the reason why Job is tested. Right. And God gives Satan permission to take everything, to see what's the motivation. And after all of it, we see that that Job passed the test.
Yeah.
He was serving God for nothing. He didn't expect anything. His motivation was purely intrinsic.
Not that he didn't struggle with it. Obviously, he struggled.
Of course, he wanted answers.
He questioned. He wanted answers, and we have to understand that that's healthy for us to ask God, why is this happening? That's a normal, healthy reaction. But the healthy believer doesn't hinge their beliefs on the blessing, but hinges their beliefs on the truth.
Yeah, and Job wanted answers from God because his friends told him, "You're suffering because you're sinful. You have sinned.
Of course.
So the punish of sin is you suffer. This is the punish." And Job said, "No, wait a minute. Well, if I sinned, show me where." Yeah, but that's what that's the struggle that he had. Why, God? I don't understand it. I accept it. I still believe. I argue with you. I put faith in you. You don't owe me anything. I just want to know, why did you do it? Is it because I was sinning? And of course, we know that Job is like a prototype of Yeshua, a righteous person that suffers from this world with no apparent reason from his point of view. And praying for his friends later. Atoning for his friends in the end of the book. But Job is another example of worshiping, putting faith in God from an intrinsic motivation, not because he owes us anything, it's because he's God.
Right.
He deserves it. And Job tells his wife, God gave, God took away, still his name is blessed. This is his world. He makes the rules.
So how do we look at that for ourselves? How do we look at that, in our lives as we kind of look to introspectively self-examine, what's our motivation? What's our heart? What did Yeshua speak on this?
So before, just one more example from Daniel, friends.
Right.
Before we go to see what Yeshua said, and of course the example Yeshua gave us, but in Daniel, friends, in Daniel the third chapter, it says that King Nebuchadnezzar, you say in English?
King Nebuchadnezzar.
Yeah. He put an idol, and if you didn't worship the idol,
Shadrach, Meshach, and
the three friends of Daniel, if you didn't worship the idol, they would throw you into the fire. And of course, Daniel friends, they were Jews, they were obeying the Torah, obeying God.
Right.
Of course, they didn't worship idols. So, now the interesting part is that the king is mad. It's like, what you're going to lose your life over worshiping a statue? Just do it. What's the problem? And the friends are saying, no, we're not gonna do it. And God, if you throw us into the fire, God can save us. They're telling the king, God can save us. But here's the point. They're saying, even if he doesn't save us from the fire, Even if he doesn't do it, we still not going to worship the idol. And that's where the king is really mad, and he throws them in. But this is such a powerful verse when they tell him, even if God doesn't rescue us, we're not gonna we're gonna obey Him and not you.
That's such a great example of the proper posture of faith, of believing that God is and that He's able, and believing that He's powerful and the source of our salvation. But at the same time, hey, if we go through trials, I'm still trusting. Exactly. Hey, if these trials come, if these tragedies come in my life, I'm still going to trust Him.
Yeah. They obey to death. Obey to death, which reminds us of Yeshua, of course.
Right.
And no wonder when the king looks down to the fire, he sees the fourth walking with them, and he says, "He looks like the Son of God."
Yeah.
No wonder that they did something they learned from Yeshua. Yeshua comes to rescue them, of course.
It's amazing.
So, and now we can see the example of Yeshua. And what did Yeshua tell His disciples in John, the 14th chapter? John 14, verse 15. He tells them, "If you love me,
right?
If you love me, you shall obey my commandments."
That's beautiful.
That's enough.
And if you look at it, you look at what really rabbinic Judaism was and the religion worldwide. But you look at, you keep the Sabbath, obey the festivals, tithe these things, all these different sacrifices and commandments. It's all like one over here, one over there. And it's like a lot of various goals to reach. And they're all kind of like here and there. All these things, you have to do all these separate things to reach something. And what Yeshua was doing, he put in Himself all in all. He brought all those commandments into Him. If you love me,
keep my commandments.
All that stuff will proceed from the love of Yeshua.
And what Yeshua did Himself was even greater, because why did He go to the cross? Why did He suffer? For His own sake?
Right.
He suffered for us.
Exactly.
This Jewish rabbi is hanging on the cross for what? Okay, because he was a thief? Because he deserved it?
No.
Not only he did it out of obedience to the Father's plan, He did it for us. So what does this? So again, thinking about even. It's in every religion, of course, not only rabbinic Judaism. And even in the church, do we sometimes do things in order to get other things?
Right.
Or we say, God,
I have to give so that I'll be blessed.
Exactly.
I have to do it. And it's just kind of like, well, obviously the law does have there's blessings if you're not committing adultery. There's blessings if you're not stealing. There's a curse if you do steal. There's a curse if you commit adultery. There's things that there's blessings and curses. But again, here's the thing. Like I notice even with my kids, it's kind of like, it's not that they don't believe you're there to punish and reward anymore. It's just that you just stop. If that focus isn't there, then it's kind of like this is bigger and this is now. Where if it's the core is my heart is wanting to please the Father, that's a whole different perspective. And it centralizes into one area because if I'm focusing on keeping the Sabbath, it's easy to see how a person who gets caught up in trying to do all these various commands.
And the laws are endless.
Can miss mercy, can miss compassion. I can't break the Shabbat to help this guy out. Oh, sorry, dude.
And it's also selfish.
Because you're thinking, comes back to you.
Yeah. How pure would you be? How holy would you be if you only keep this kosher, this much, or this? It's
because you're
selfish.
Climbing a ladder to that and climbing a ladder to this, and then it's kind of like, Paul even spoke of this really very succinctly and say, when he said, kind of giving his credentials here, a Jew of Jews. I was taught by Gamaliel. I was so zealous. I was even persecuting the church and all these things like that.
Top of my class.
Top of the class. I mean, he was a genius. He was going to be the next head Rav.
And Yeshua found him, what did he say?
It's all for nothing, for the sake of knowing Him. So all that stuff, he says, it's rubbish. It's dung compared to knowing him, knowing God. And that really, if you look at the whole narrative of the Torah, the prophets, the scriptures as a whole, it all centers into knowing him. And it's kind of like, so what if you go to Bible college and learn all these things and study and grow but if you don't know him, if you don't spend time with him, what is it? Did he die on the cross for us to do religious works, or did he die on the cross so that we could come into relationship with him again?
And what did Yeshua say about the two most important commandments, to love God and to love thy neighbor? And look at his motivation in going to the cross. He was obedient to God, thinking about us,
Wow.
Just look at the motivation. Nothing selfish. Obedient to God, obedient to the Father, thinking about us, about his neighbors, about his fellow men.
Right.
Unbelievable.
It's hard to fathom that the God of the universe would actually, one, stoop down to even recognize us, but then secondly, that he would come to be an example.
Exactly.
Struggle in the dirt and muck of this world to be an example.
And
for us,
just one more sentence. I see my time is almost, our time is almost up. So one more sentence. You said that there's blessings in the commandments, and of course there's blessing, and there's benefits in obeying your parents, and of course, but the most important blessing is to know him, to obey him. Not because he owes you something, because it's a privilege that you got to know him. He saved your life. Now it's a privilege. The blessing is to know him. The blessing is to following him. Whatever the circumstances, whatever happens. But the blessing itself it's knowing and following him for his own sake, because he's worthy, and he proved it by the cross, by what Yeshua did.
To give one good example, final example on this is, extrinsic motivation is I obey the commandment to be faithful to my wife because I want to have a good relationship with her, and I don't want to divorce, and I don't want to deal with a bunch of problems and stuff like that. But on the other side, intrinsic is where I see that, even beyond the advantage that I would have in a relationship and keeping that together is, wow, Yeshua did this for me. Like, he's been faithful always to me, even when I've messed up. And so it's like the life that he lived and the example that he set and his love that he gave. It's like when you look to that core, when we're dealing with forgiveness, when we're dealing with love and hatred, when we're dealing with all these different sin issues and iniquity issues that we suffer through in life and that we fight against, we always look back to Yeshua. We always look back to God as the chief example of love, of faithfulness, of kindness, of mercy.
Exactly.
We look at that, and that's the intrinsic core
and
that
what did
should
he say?
drive our life.
If you love me, you shall obey my commandments. You shall follow me. Out of love. You don't need anything more. Love, the love of God is sufficient, is enough for us.
And that brings everything in. That brings all the law, all the Torah, all the prophets together as one. So, Father, we just thank you for this. We thank you for your love, Lord. And just ask that you would really bless our listeners just with a revelation as they're listening to this and thinking about their own lives as we examine ourselves, Lord. Would you point out the parts where maybe we've missed our motivation? And God, I just ask that you would really help for us to have all of our source of life, all of our fountains in you. And Lord, that you would really speak to us in the areas that we're off. And thank you for your love to correct us, Lord. And we just pray your blessing over our listeners in Yeshua's name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Dr. Broshi.
Thank you.